Okay, this is Neil from Baltimore, facilitating the workshop for Tradition and Concept 5, and we are going to have our first speaker, Midge from California, tell her story and how the principle of consideration influences her service in OA. Go ahead, Midge.
Hi, Neil. Thank you very much for your service and for all who are here today. Before I begin, I'd like to just highlight some of the parts of Concept 5. Concept 5 says individuals have the right of appeal and petition in order to ensure that their opinions and personal grievances will be carefully considered. And the principle for this concept is consideration. And consideration means that at every level, any OA member may ask for an opportunity to present an issue for consideration. The process is like this. Members appeal to the groups appeal to their inner groups, and inner groups to their region or service board, and then to the region board of trustees. That's the service structure in this concept. Any member that's unhappy with a decision of the WSB or their meeting or their inner group can voice their opinions to the inner group or the region rep, and then a motion is submitted for consideration at the next conference. The best ways to appeal a decision is to make a written detailed account of the concern and then bring it to the attention of the appropriate service body. Any consideration, although it's a right to appeal by every OA member, group, or service body, automatic reconsideration is not, nor does it mean if reconsidered as a decision will be reversed. Decisions depend upon the merits of the appeal. Simple displeasure at the outcome of a vote may not be sufficient for the issue to be reconsidered. Finally, the decision is put to the test of time, and sometimes that proves the decision right or wrong. Policies have been reversed in the fellowship at all levels after many years of discussion and consideration. So as we look at those ideas in this concept, I hope that you will hear them in my share as I go along. First, I want to qualify and tell you a little bit about me. My name, again, is Midge. I'm an abstinent compulsive overeater, living in recovery by practicing steps 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. I give thanks to my higher power and the loving support of my sponsor and sponsees and this supportive fellowship for help as well. I've worked the steps many times. I've studied the traditions and concepts, and I try to apply their principles in my recovery service and also in my personal life. I'm maintaining a 45-pound weight loss, of which I'll say more a little later. I follow a food plan that's created for me, a 78-year-old woman with limited mobility. I sponsor others, and I give service at 2 of 3 phone meetings. I also attend weekly meetings and speak at face-to-face meetings, and I also do other services I can. My most recent service in my phone meeting is working with the support of a trustee to help our phone meetings make a transition from an inactive intergroup to form a virtual service board, and we're just at the beginnings of that, and that's proving to be exciting and very informative. Briefly, I was not an overweight child, but the seeds of my addiction were planted while I was growing up in an undiagnosed alcoholic home and came to fruition later as I tried to deal with things by consuming food. My battle with weight began after my marriage at an early age when after each pregnancy, I maintained the weight. And I did that. I struggled with my weight for 19 years, from about age 21 to 40. Doing the things, swearing off foods, going on diets, putting them back on, and so forth, which is, I'm sure, a familiar story to those of us in recovery. And in the interest of time, I'll just say to you that the bedevilments that are spoken of on page 52 in the big book and the if-onlys spoken of on pages 4 and 5 of the OA 12 and 12 describe me, what I was like before recovery. My top weight was 199 pounds. I took off 60 pounds on a doctor-supervised diet. I stabilized at 45 pounds for about 2 years. I didn't understand that I had an illness. I thought mistakenly that I only had a weight problem, and if I solved it, I'd be happy. So for 2 years, I kept it off. But then at the age of 40, after 23 years of marriage, 4 lovely children, and years of therapy, many diets, a college degree, and a good job, I was back again, eating and fearful. And that's when I found OA. At another fellowship, I had never been to a 12-step meeting before, and this one was totally unrelated to drinking or eating or any of those other things. And the speaker there spoke of having taken off a lot of weight with the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. And I never knew, I'd never heard about that, but I was so taken with his recovery story and I saw something that I had never seen or heard before. So I wanted whatever that was, and he wasn't talking about a food plan or that kind of thing. He was talking about a new way of living by practicing certain ways of being and doing, and first of all, giving service, of which he was doing at that meeting. And so I came to OA, and that began the miracle happening in my life. My recovery includes 2 breaks in the program, one in 1977 at the age of 40 for about 3 months after I moved from Ohio to California. And the other came at 74 in 2011 after 32 and a half years of back-to-back abstinence. And it took me about a year and a half to come to terms with that and the shame I was heaping upon myself with that. But I want to tell you a little bit about my service story, which includes intergroup rep in California and Illinois. And it was there I learned to listen and respect others and to curb my tendency to think that I knew best how things needed to be done. I learned how to keep coming back rather than taking my marbles, so to speak, and leaving when things didn't go as I thought, or sulking or that kind of thing. I learned to trust myself and others in service as others put trust in me. And later, as I studied the concepts, I learned how the individual speaks through the representation throughout the service structure of OA. At the intergroup, I also learned to step out of my comfort zone as I chaired different committees at different times, some at the Northern Cal, which is now the Silicon Valley Intergroup, but then it was the Northern Cal Intergroup, as retreat program chair, public information chair. I edited a monthly newsletter. And one example of the way that Concept 5, which again is individuals have the right of appeal and petition in order to ensure their opinions and personal grievances will be carefully considered, was at. So anyway, what happened there was I was secretary of a group conscious meeting, and a motion for the meeting to become fragrance-free was put before the group. And we discussed it. We had pros and cons, and the group passed the motion. At the next meeting, however, a long-standing member, very active in the group, wasn't at the meeting, so they asked that the motion be revisited at our next business meeting. And that really flummoxed me because I didn't know what to do. I thought the person was just wanting to control what had happened. So what I did was I called the intergroup chair and talked it over with her, and she suggested that I call the region representative from our meeting, which I did, and she recommended me to the region trustee. And as I talked with her and told her what the situation was, she went over Concept 5 with me, starting first with the principles consideration, which said that every level an OA member can ask for an issue to be reconsidered, which I've read to you before, the right of the member to appeal. She told me that instead of, I kind of got from her that instead of the person acting in a controlling way, the person instead might have been exercising the principle of consideration in Concept 5. So as it turns out, when I got back to the meeting and we considered it, the action was reversed with unanimity. I was relieved to know, with the help of several, as you heard, the steps along the way in the structure, the OA structure, to learn that everyone has a voice, including the minority opinion, and could be respectfully heard. And also, even that decision about the fragrance meeting could be revisited after another period of time. So that was one example. In my personal life, service has helped me reach for higher goals as those principles guide my relationship with my family and my work, helped me to complete graduate school, participate in religious studies, and also start my own business where I got to practice them on a daily basis. One example that I have is where recently my spouse and I needed to revisit some legal decisions we had made that needed updating. And through my study of Concept 5, I saw where I had the right to ask for reconsideration of some decisions that I had made, that I could speak to what I thought needed changing, and at the same time, I could hear what my spouse thought also. I talked this over with my concept study partner, whom I had been working with. I met her at a meeting, and she heard me share about the concept workshop that I'd been to, and she wanted to study them. So on a monthly basis, she and I went over each concept, seeing how it applied to our OA recovery and how it applied in service and how it applied to our lives. So I was doing that at the time, and so I wrote out the detailed account of what I was concerned with. I included my reasons why I wanted the things that I wanted, and I shared it with her. And then in the process, I discovered some mistakes that I made, and I got an opportunity to clear that up. So when the time for the discussion came, it went smoother than any we had had before. I felt like an equal partner. I felt like we both had a voice and that we had acted for the good of the whole of our family unit. Another lesson that I learned was in how service helped my recovery came from inventorying that second break that I had in 2011, which came after 2 years of intensive preparation to lead a weekend retreat and also to give service as a registration chair at the convention. My co-leader had to change her plans, so I chose to go alone, and the intergroup approved it. During that time, I had asked several members to help me facilitate an activity after we covered our step work at the retreat. And while I had the basic idea, each one of the 4 women brought their own ideas of how we could accomplish it. So again, we had an opportunity to apply the principle of consideration in Concept 5. And we incorporated the ideas that we could from each person, and it provided enjoyment for the retreat participants, which again benefited the whole. It was after this retreat and convention that I saw that I had taken on too much service. I was wearing several service hats at the convention, and I saw the downside of that service experience. Another example of service is after leaving OA, service again came to my rescue. While I was sharing at a relapse and recovery meeting, a newcomer asked if I would sponsor her. I had shared about the shame of leaving the service after the many wonderful years of recovery in my life and the benefits to my family. She asked me to sponsor her, and I suggested she try several meetings, and if she hadn't found a sponsor by then, that I would work with her. In between that time, I signed up for a tradition and concept workshop. I got a sponsor, and I stepped back into service again, and that led me to my service today, which brings me to why I volunteered to share my recovery story. My sponsor sent me an email about this workshop last year, showed me the opportunity for service. So at first I was hesitant because I thought I hadn't done a lot of service throughout the entire structure of OA recovery, OA service rather. And she reminded me that what I could do was share the experiences that I did have, which is what I've tried to do with you very briefly. As I looked at my recovery service over that 35-year period, I saw that I was a speaker at meetings, at workshops, at special observance days, such as Day in OA, Unity Day, on health panels, STEP, tradition workshops, as a panelist on OA's 44th birthday, and also as a keynote speaker at the region that I'm in, and also, as I've said, the convention chair and the retreat leader. This has helped me appreciate the value of these Sunday workshops, see how a working understanding could have helped me have a little bit more fun and be a little bit more relaxed had I been more in touch with the concepts as I was giving that service. A bonus was that these concepts and principles increase my growth in my personal life as well. And I want to close by saying that my higher power gave me what I needed in this process over the years of my recovery in OA and through the service and the service structure by showing me how important service and working knowledge of the steps and traditions and concepts are to my continued growth and to the growth of OA as a whole. In this program, they say this is a we program, and together we get better through service at all levels. So I want to thank you for allowing me to do service. I also want to say Happy Mother's Day to everyone and a prayerful thought to all who are feeling a loss this day. The three questions I would like to hear about from your experience is, one of them is a two-part question. One, how much time and energy does a member in recovery owe OA? How can you tell when it's really too much? I'll repeat that again. How much time and energy does a member in recovery owe OA? How can you tell when it's too much? The second question is, how do you work with others whose opinions are different from yours? How do you work with others whose opinions are different than yours? And how do you make sure you, as well as our leaders, remain trusted servants? How do you make sure you, as well as our trusted leaders, remain trusted servants? Thank you so much again for allowing me to share, and I look forward to hearing your experience, strength, and hope.
Thank you, Midge, for your share and for your questions. Oh, they're great. So we're going to take about the next 5 minutes to give people an opportunity to share. We have another speaker. It's a recorded speaker who's going to speak to the tradition and the spiritual principle of purpose. But until that time, the meeting is open for shares. If you care to, please press *6 to unmute. Okay, we're going to have time at the end of the meeting for sharing as well. So at this point, I'm going to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the OA website podcast page. So anyone who does choose to speak, it will be considered implied consent to have your voice and your share recorded and posted. In order to preserve your anonymity, please use only your first name or a fictitious name when you share. And we will also, for anyone who would wish to make a Seventh Tradition donation, we are self-supporting through our own contributions. You can use special workshop meeting number. If you want to record this, it'll be attributed to this meeting. Workshop meeting number 82278 when making your contribution. While this workshop has no direct expenses, our Seventh Tradition reminds us that we are self-supporting through our contributions. If you care to, you can go to www.oa.org and click on contributions and make the donation directly there. All right, so this brings us to our second speaker. We have a recording from Marie, and I am going to start that, and I believe she'll be sharing for about 25 minutes, and then we will break for questions when she is done.
Hi, my name is Maria, and I'm a compulsive overeater, and I'm going to share my personal story for 10 minutes, followed by a 15-minute share on Tradition 5, which is to carry the message to the compulsive overeater who still suffers. So, I came into OA about 12 years ago. I have been a compulsive overeater my whole life. I think I probably picked up food when I was about 4 years old. Things got interesting in my house when my parents divorced and then my mom remarried. And I discovered the joy of birthdays because we didn't have treats in our house, but at birthdays we had birthday cake. And birthday cake was my big weakness. In fact, everything around birthdays was pretty fantastic, but the cake was probably the best. And I went on to just become a sugar addict. And sugar and food got me through a difficult childhood. And when I got into my teens, I started to try to lose weight, and I did it every way that I possibly could think of. I spent one summer basically not eating and riding my bicycle. I spent other years addicted to diet pills. And my weight fluctuated, went all over the place, but it never stayed down. And it was really frustrating and crazy-making for me. So when I got to my 20s, I just decided to stop dieting per se, and I was just going to try to watch what I ate. And I ballooned up to about 190 pounds. I don't know what that is in kilograms. And then into my 20s and 30s, my weight basically just fluctuated up and down for the next 2 decades. And by that, I don't mean that I was thin ever. I was always overweight. I was somewhere around 185 pounds down to maybe 175, all during that time. And very occasionally I might make it down to something like 160. So I had about 4 different sizes of wardrobes that I needed to keep because I just didn't know what size I was going to be. My size was just constantly changing. The way that I behaved around food, I never binged, but I just never got hungry. I would continuously eat. So I would just eat some breakfast in the morning, and then I just would kind of keep going all day. I would have just little amounts of food continuously. And like I said, I just never got hungry. And I was addicted to sugar and sweet things. And so some days it never really had any real food. I just had sweets and treats. And that was actually a thing that was quite difficult for me after I got into OA, was just dealing with that desire to constantly have something exciting, to live life without having treats, if you will. And maybe that harks back to those birthday parties when I was a child, because it was that concept that we could have a special event when we could all go a little crazy. But the thing that I realized was that I couldn't go crazy and then get back to normal. I would give up sugar. Before I got to OA, I would give up sugar. Once I actually managed to make it for 9 months without eating sugar, and then I just cracked. That was my all-time record for the longest I could go without eating sugar. And mostly what would happen would be that I would try to give it up, I would fight it, and then something would happen, like a birthday or a Christmas or something. And I remember one year I made it all the way through till Christmas, and then it was probably April that I realized Christmas was over, and I was still eating as if it was a special occasion all that time. So I was just really just constantly indulging in my trigger food, which is sugar. So then what happened was I made it into an OA meeting eventually. What literally happened was I was living in London, and I knew about OA because a friend had told me about it, but I really felt like this was something I should resolve on my own, and wasn't something that I needed any help from anyone else with. It felt actually like a sign of weakness if I turned to other people for help. Like that should be something I could manage on my own. So I didn't go to OA even though I'd heard about it. So I was American. I am American, and I was living in London. I lived in London for almost 10 years. Heard about OA, never went. Weight went all over the place. When I left London to move to New Zealand, because I'm a big fan of geographic cures, I was not at my highest weight ever, but I was at a pretty high weight, and I really couldn't fit into most of my clothes. There was like one pair of jeans that I could fit into. And just as I was leaving London, we had to kind of pack up all of our things, clean up our flat, and then I had to get on a flight for 8 hours to go to Chicago to visit my family, and then from there I was going to go on to New Zealand. And I cleaned the flat in these jeans, while wearing these jeans, and then I kind of realized, I had nothing else I could wear. I was actually going to then have to travel on that 8-hour flight wearing these disgusting, filthy jeans because there was nothing else I could get into. And so I did. And that was a real low point for me. And when I got to the States, I bought a couple of jeans immediately, went out the next day, so I'd have a pair for when the other pair was in the wash. And I remember they were a size 18, which was a really big size for me. I'm very tall, but that still was like the largest size I'd ever had to buy. And then I spent a month with my parents, which was meant to be me just hanging out with them before I moved even further away, but I didn't. I just binged for the whole month that I was there. I basically locked myself in my room and watched music videos and ate. And then I left for New Zealand, where I was going to make a new start. I was going to stop all the eating and the craziness, of course. And so I got to New Zealand, and I realized there was food I had never seen before. Like there were sweets and treats in the shop, that I had never had before, and I had to try them. And so I discovered, I think it was maybe in the first week that I was in New Zealand, I'd had dinner, and I went to have like a biscuit, a cookie, and then I went back to watching TV, and then I went back and had another biscuit, and then I went back to the TV, and I swear I was just going back for like the third biscuit, but I realized that was the end of the packet. I had eaten all of them, and I just felt miserable. It was like I thought I could outrun this disease, and it had followed me all the way across the world. I don't know why I thought I could outrun it, but I did, and I was absolutely devastated. It was like, this is never going to end. I was 38, I was just about to turn 39, and all I could think was like, am I going to be doing this when I'm 48, when I'm 58, 68, 78? Am I going to do this for the next 40 years? And I just was so disheartened by that concept. And then the next day, a community newspaper arrived, and in it was an ad for OA. And I couldn't believe it. It was like it had followed me all the way to this little town at the south of the South Island of New Zealand. I felt like that it had followed me here to where I live today. I couldn't believe it. I felt so privileged that I hadn't managed to lose it by, not attending when I was in London. And so I went to my first meeting, and I'd like to say that I was immediately abstinent and everything changed. But the thing that did happen was I saw other people who were comfortable in their own skin without overeating. People who told me or told the group horrifying stories of crazy behavior with food, but who were now well, and they had been well for years, and their weight had stabilized and had been the same for years. And I just couldn't believe it. When I heard that, I knew I was hearing the truth, and I couldn't believe it was possible for me, but they assured me that they were just ordinary people and they were just doing whatever the program told them to do. And I thought, well, if they could do it, then I can do it too. And I believed, and I still believe, that really all I had to do was kind of follow directions. I didn't have to be a miracle worker or a superwoman. I just had to follow some simple directions. And so even though in my 12 years in OA I have relapsed periodically, I have never left. I've continued to come to meetings. I've continued to give service. And my weight has actually stayed almost the same in that entire time. I think it took me a few years at the beginning to lose my excess weight. I no longer wear a size 18 in a U.S. size. I wear a size 10. My current weight, I'm not entirely sure what it is in pounds because now I work with kilos, but I think it's about 154 pounds, which is 70 kilos. And it has stayed there for years now, which is, to me, the biggest miracle. And when I used to go and visit my family in Chicago, I used to have to, I didn't know what clothes were going to fit me. Well, for years now, I haven't had to pack a suitcase when I go because I just wear the same clothes every year. I've just bought some clothes there and left them there, and I can wear them every time I go home. And to me, that's another miracle, the idea that my weight is the same. At a certain point, I took the big plunge and I even got rid of those original jeans, which was a big scary thing to do. I kind of wish I had kept them just to prove that I had been that size, but I didn't. And that was scary because I had to really finally trust that my weight was not all going to come back. And it never has done. Even though I have, like I said, I have relapsed occasionally, my weight has never fluctuated by more than 10 pounds. In all these years. So that's my personal story. And now I guess I'm meant to talk about always extending the heart and hand of OA to the compulsive overeater who still suffers. And I can relate to that in various ways. One way is that, I was a compulsive overeater who still suffered when I came to the meeting and at various times during my recovery, during my time in OA, I've relapsed. And it always felt to me like I was welcome at the meeting. I've never been forbidden from sharing. I've never been rejected in any way. I've always shared a message of hope when I've been at a meeting, even though I didn't always have a message of strength around recovery. I always had a message of hope around recovery because I always believed that if I kept coming back and if I kept working the program, and I mean by that I would work the steps, that eventually I would become abstinent and stay abstinent again, which has always happened for me. Thank God. Thank my higher power for that, because it meant that I didn't have to leave, I wasn't a failure, and I didn't have to somehow be perfect to come to the meeting in the first place. The other way that I see, that I look at Tradition 5, is that it means that I focus on the people who come to the meeting who need us to reach out to them. I remember how isolated I felt when I first came to the meeting and how terrified I was. I mean, I had only been living in New Zealand for a month, and I was still terrified that I was going to see someone I knew at the meeting and that they were somehow going to negatively judge me for not having worked out this weight thing all by myself. And so I know that that's what it's like for other people when they first come to a meeting, that they're getting past a lot of hurdles to make it there. They're not there because, life is going really well and it's all great and they just want to see what this OA thing is about. I know that people, when they're really suffering, if they're anything like me, they really, really are suffering. And so extending the heart and hand of OA means that I reach out to those people. We've always given out newcomers packs at our meetings, and we always would put our numbers down. I now also very gently ask people if I can have their number, and I promise I won't, I always tell them, I promise I won't bother them or pester them, but just to check in with them and see if they're okay and see if they want to talk at all or if they have any questions or anything. Because it can be really difficult, I think, when people first come in for them to even really understand at all what our program is about. And I always say to them, this is a real slow burn. This is not an overnight sensation. This is not a quick fix. It will take a while, but you will get there if you stay with it. And I try to encourage people to just stay with it. And we have had a few people who've come and stayed, which has been fabulous, because it's kept our very small meeting alive, because we are in a very small town, and it's really important to me that I have that meeting, from purely selfish reasons as well. It's really important to me that we continue to extend the invitation to people so that we get members and so that we hopefully keep members as well. We also do a little bit of PI. We're not that great at it, I have to admit. We don't really have enough people to organize into a separate public information committee, but we do put up posters. Part of the issue we have is that we're a university town, and so if we put up posters around the university, we often will get members, which is fantastic, and then of course they graduate and leave. But we have had some amazing members with amazing sharing, and it has helped my recovery, even though they've only come for 2 months because they were maybe a foreign, international student, and they just realized, before the end of their semester that there was this thing called OA, and they just came and hit the ground running. So I know that no matter who I extend this to, we will get back, 100-fold. From that love that we share with those people, from that invitation that we extend to them to be a part of our meeting and to be a part of our fellowship. And I know that this is the tradition that says, this is what our group does. So this is our group's purpose. This is why we exist. We're not here to make money off of people, and we're certainly not here to try to cure people, but we are just here so that we can offer help and love and support to each other. And that reminds me that when I come to a meeting, if I take those traditions from a personal perspective, that just reminds me that that's the real reason why I'm at the meeting. So even though I'm sharing because it makes me feel good and it helps me to get present, work out what's going on in my life around my issues with food and eating and body image and all of those things, really the reason I'm sharing is to help the compulsive overeater who still suffers. And so my focus when I'm sharing is not only just on what's happening in my life, but it's just that I might hopefully be able to share a message that someone else can use. Because it's no good to me if I go to a meeting and, dump a bunch of stuff, but nobody finds anything of any use inside of what I'm sharing. When I came to that first meeting that I attended, there was a woman there who shared about horrific things that she did with food. She was bulimic, and she would hide the vomit and then dispose of it elsewhere, and it was disgusting. But it was true, and it was heartfelt, and what I got from it was how well she was today. How much the program had changed her so that she wasn't still doing those things from her past. But the fact that she could be honest with me or with all of us about it made me see that I could be honest with other people. It sort of acted like a set of training wheels for me for how to actually be able to let people know those big scary secrets that I had carried around, because I had hope that I could actually stop that behavior. And now today I can share from that same place where I can honestly tell people what I used to be like, how I treated food, how I used to take things out of the rubbish bins. I've even put cat food on top of food, and I mean the tinned cat food, and still washed it off and managed to eat that food. That's the crazy stuff that I've done with food. And I have found that being honest like that with newcomers has really allowed me to feel completely comfortable in my own skin. but also I hope has allowed them to see that that crazy behavior that they might have, whatever it could be, is probably not going to be any crazier than what somebody in the group has already done and has gotten over. So that concept that we can get better, we can recover from all kinds of crazy compulsive eating behaviors as well as the food behaviors. To me, that's part of the message of hope and recovery that I share and that I get from those meetings. I've heard in other fellowships as well, we're only as sick as our secrets. And that to me is part of what we do when we come to the meeting, is that we're able to let these things come out and just be there out in the light of day because we trust one another, because we trust the program, trust our higher power. And to me, that's also extending that to those newcomers or the people who might still be suffering, even if they're long-term members, to let them know that there isn't anything that they can't recover from. It's been my experience in my years of recovery that I've had to deal with issues with food. I've had to deal with issues around relationships with other people. I can take pretty much anything and put it through the 12 steps. And I have shared sometimes about that process, but I really focus on the food because I know that that's why people are at that meeting. That's what drew me to the meeting. I needed it to be about food, because I didn't understand when people talked about handing things over to their higher power. That just meant nothing to me. Even the entire concept of a higher power really meant nothing to me when I first came to the program. So it really meant that when I am talking to people who are still suffering, I need to make sure that I'm extending to them that message of hope, but I'm also extending to them the message of hope around the recovery from compulsive eating. Because that is the reason why they're there. It's the reason why I came. And that part of that recovery is, of course, that all sorts of amazing different things happen in my life. The food is almost an afterthought in terms of all the ways that I've grown. But it was critical. It was what got me through the door, was that horrible pain that I had around food, and for me personally, around my body image as well. And I couldn't always see that when I first came in, that was part of the entire picture for me, was that it wasn't actually just around the way I looked, but actually it was around my eating behavior. In some ways, I was in crazy great denial around about how I ate, and actually just sort of thought that it was really just about the weight rather than the eating. So I guess I'll just conclude by saying I believe that in this program, because of that tradition, as well as because of the 12th step, which says that we also practice these principles in all our affairs, that we are reaching out to newcomers, to each other, to anyone who has this disease. And that could mean that I just have got a sympathetic ear for anyone who talks about having issues with weight and food who may not actually be a member of the fellowship. If I hear people talk about eating and food issues at work, I will just say to them, oh yeah, no, I used to do that sort of thing too. And if I think it's appropriate, I have told people about my membership in OA. I mean, I definitely share that anyway with my immediate colleagues because I think it's important that they know. But also just that I share it with people sensitively who may also be telling me about compulsive eating behaviors. But I've never sort of coerced anyone to coming to a meeting. I have invited people to meetings. No one's taken me up on it, unfortunately. So for me, a lot of what I do in my fifth tradition is basically focused on the people who have made it to a meeting, because they're the ones that I know at least have made it that far. They've taken that step in their own recovery. And so that's where I have focused a lot of my attention, and I always make sure that I welcome those people and speak to those people after a meeting, because I also know that that's part of that feeling of isolation that I had when I first came. That I feel like that's part of breaking through that, is just making sure that people do feel like they're welcomed and that they're part of, if not the main focus of why we're there, but they're part of the reason for that group running as well. because that's what we're all about, isn't it? And no matter how much recovery any of us have, I've been in the program for 12 years, and as you heard, I have kind of like a 30-pound weight loss in that time, but I'm never recovered. I'm still a compulsive overeater. I might not be suffering today, but I don't know what tomorrow can bring. This is a one-day-at-a-time program, and so it keeps me humble to constantly reach out to those people and remember where I came from. And to me, that's part of the most important part of this program is I'm always also on step one. And so I'm still powerless over food. I'm still very much a compulsive overeater. I'm just very grateful that I happen to have 12 years in this program, and I've had long-term recovery and abstinence. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Okay, those were the recorded remarks of Maria, and we thank her for her service. At this time, we have about 7 minutes left, so I would like to once again give the people who are listening an opportunity to share on either the concept principle of consideration, the right to appeal or petition, in order to ensure that our opinions and personal grievances will be carefully considered, or the spiritual principle of purpose. The primary purpose of each group is to carry its message to the compulsive overeater who still suffers. Is there anyone who would like to share at this time? Well, I have something to share, which, the reason that I was asked to facilitate this meeting is because many of the people who do this kind of thing have been at the World Service Business Conference, which means that they're all flying home right now. Something happened with me where I was actually supposed to be at the World Service Business Conference. And as a direct result of some issues that came up in trying to do outreach, there were some complaints that were registered against me that the way that I did this outreach was considered harsh. And so a few individuals actually contacted the intergroup, and, in addition to being the World Service delegate, I was also the editor of the newsletter, and I've been active in intergroup. I've been in program for 25 years. The intergroup asked that I step down as the World Service delegate and that I step away from my service position as the editor of the newsletter, and it was suggested that I might consider staying away from the intergroup. I was obviously very shocked at this, and the way it's been described, the way that I work a spiritual program is to take a step back and look at the greater good, which is the purpose of most of these traditions. And so I agreed to do all of those things, only it just didn't seem exactly right to me. Almost immediately I felt that what was being done was punitive, which is another concept that I felt was in violation, and that I asked the intergroup to reconsider their decision, and they did not do so. And so I find myself having been asked to facilitate this meeting because I happen to be around just in time to hear of these two specific spiritual principles that have an immediate bearing on something that's happened to me that I consider to be one of the more significant and uncomfortable experiences that I've had in my 26 years in OA. So I see that God, in His infinite wisdom, has moved the pieces around so that I would have the opportunity to have this information presented to me. And I'm extremely grateful for that. I will say that I accepted the decision of the intergroup, but I believe I am going to petition to be reinstated. And, of course, based on the second tradition, whatever the outcome is, the group conscience will speak, and I will observe and honor that final decision. But I just want to say to anyone who's listening that these guiding principles with the steps and the traditions and the concepts were born, in many cases, out of mistakes that we have made over the 50 years we've been in business. They have practical application to our lives. And so I would leave you with that thought, and that learning about these concepts and the spiritual principles elevates my individual recovery, and it helps me have harmonious relationships with as many people as possible in my life, and that includes many people who are different than I am. I feel like that's my job in recovery, is to relate myself to people who are of every different stripe and shape and size and philosophy, and I'm extremely grateful that I'm in this program. I've been abstinent for 20 years. I never lost my abstinence. That was not a reason I was asked to step down. We have it in our bylaws that if a person loses their abstinence, they are considered to have stepped away from a service position, and I have always supported that because I felt that in the end, our abstinence is the fuel that drives the engine of service and everything else. And so our time is almost at a close. So I would like to ask anyone who is still listening to unmute by pressing *6. And after a moment of silence, we will close with the Serenity Prayer. And let me just say that the opinions expressed here today are those of individual OA members and may not represent OA as a whole. So press *6 to unmute, and we will end after a moment of silence with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I will not mine be done.
Thanks for your service.